1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So in the governance work session, the only thing we have to do today is look at the technology OE and the measures, because I didn't update at the Thursday's board meeting, so I will not update again. Remember, as we look at this, it's in the context of the bigger picture of us just reworking these. This is the first report we've had since we reworked our OEs. And in the context of we are doing our strategic planning moving forward, so we don't want to have too many wild moving parts. So when you look at what was A through G in the report, but 1 through 7 up on board docs, any concerns with the operational expectations, which are our values that we set out? Okay. So now we're going to look at the measures. So what the governance committee needs enough guidance. We're not looking for exact words or anything like that, but we need enough guidance from the board to how we're feeling about the measures. I'll give an example of one that caught my eye that we probably wouldn't need, which I'm not going to find that quickly, is the one about we're giving 100% of SOL tests online. Well, I have trouble with these words. We're required to anyway, and we're doing it, so I would think we don't need that to be a measure in the report. So I'm looking for anybody. Sandy.
I think that's one of the few measures that we could probably drop at this point, unless we have any reason to believe that,
it's outdated.
We've, dropped down. Listening to what Mary Beth told us, that most of these things are things that they capture anyway. I would rather have more than less in general. So, I'm happy to have all of the information that we get if it doesn't add to staff workload. I do agree with you on, I love the appendix. I do think it could probably be configured in such a way. I mean, I look at U and AB. Those are the two that are of particular interest to me, and I see what you're saying in terms of it would be great to be able to see it all in a way that you can see the school and you can see the line and not have to so if that were one where maybe some of the more marginal information could be the ones over on the right hand side, I don't know if that's possible. I mean, a number of copiers and things like that, unless somebody believes that number of copiers is a problem or an issue, maybe it could be reconfigured. It's just a suggestion, but I agree with you, Mrs. Smith, that I think it's important to be able to read the things that we particularly focus on.
I'm just going to move through this so we get consensus. Is everybody fine if we make that recommendation to staff that they reconfigure that chart so it's easier to read the data? Megan?
To Ms. Evans' point, though, what I was wondering, because this is incredibly detailed, I wondered if we could actually break it up then into just 2 charts, and then we kind of identify.
That's what we're saying.
If there's, maybe you all could help us and tell us which columns you like the most, and I can do one chart that's sort of your high priorities, and I can do a second, chart that has the other columns that are not.
I'm going to take a guess at that.
Okay.
The things that are just counting numbers of items is probably different than things that affect percentages of services and things like that. That's a good way to put it. Okay. Sandy, anything else? Okay. Megan, I had you next.
Yeah, that was one of the 2 points that I wanted to raise right now, so I'm glad we're going to move on that. The second one is about the actual measures. I would be most comfortable as a member of the governance committee to not only hear from my colleagues on what they feel, which measures are more substantive and meaningful, but also to get the professional input from Dr. Garza and Ms. Loveglass on, are there measures in here that as you look at them, you think, well, I've captured them to report to the board, but I don't necessarily think they're essential for capturing how we're doing in this department and these services. If Ms. Loveglass or Dr. Garza were to say, no, we really feel like these are the measures we want to continue to report on, I would defer to that. And as some of my colleagues, I believe, Ms. Strauss, you've said in the past, it's valuable to have a one-stop place for information. But I am trying to wrestle with, as Mr. Velkoff has noted in prior discussions, how do we have these speak to us with the most substantive information for board review without losing sometimes the more important information from all of the detail in the other measures? Does that make sense, Dr. Garza or Ms. Loveglass?
In fact, I was just looking through them to see whether there are some that could be reduced.
And I didn't mean at this work session. I meant
Right.
that would be my advocacy to my colleagues, that in addition to your input, if people agree, it would be great to have Ms. Loveglass and Dr.
Sure.
Garza report back to the governance committee with recommendations.
One of the things that we were trying to be responsive to is that you sort of had that A through G. You have a lot of different things. We were trying to have something that that had a response to each of those categories. So if we take some of these out, we may not have something for each of those categories. Does that make sense? So I certainly agree that the SOLs, that, over the last 5 years, that was something that was a target for the state. Now that we've met that, I agree we don't need to do that anymore. We're there. But we could certainly look at that. But
So Megan put out a request asking staff to just look at the measures and bring to governance their best advice if anything could be cut out. Are we comfortable with that direction? Okay.
Sure.
And I'm going to add on to that I think there is agreement that 1.5, I found it, could be cut out. Okay? Elizabeth, then Ted.
Mine's just a quick, almost like a follow-on to that. As a lead-in to the meeting manager pre-meetings, one of the things that I said, quite often legislators, are marked as being good legislators by creating bills and creating laws, which creates more. And maybe changing the measure would be, not only, oh, I didn't propose any new bills. I actually proposed bills to be, laws to be retracted. And so that's kind of the thought process is that if we don't learn anything meaningful, and I'll just point one out from my perspective, and I understand that you may find it meaningful to report to us, but to tell me how many computers there are per technician, yeah, we know. I mean, but to have to do that count and calculate that and make a graph, and I'm like, I don't know that adds anything. So those are the kind of things that I'm hoping that, peel back,
okay.
repeal.
Ted, you were done? Yeah. Ted?
So I have a couple of questions about our process, and I think when we say, each time we get a report like this, we have an opportunity to review these operational expectations, that inclusively, that means we could send back to governance, which please look at the wording of stuff, kind of like what Ms. Schultz is saying, right, that maybe we've got 12 items and we'd like it reduced to 3 or something to that effect. So that is our process, correct? Correct. So given that understanding, I had an observation this weekend that our process really is that we review these operational expectations as they come up with each monitoring report. And I just know that my own work is kind of unfocused. And I'm concerned that I have concerns about this process, and so it led me to think about potentially a different process. And I'm sure I got way ahead of myself in detail in an email that I sent to you, Mrs. Smith, and I believe I copied the chair and vice chair. So my question is, when I have an idea about how we could govern ourselves differently, is that something that I need to bring forward at a forum? Is it something that I can simply send to the governance committee? What is the proper way of proposing
My
that?
suggestion would be a forum, but I want to correct one thing you said about how we update these. We as a board updated the operational expectations. Okay, so we did that. But because we want this to be a flexible breathing system, we've also built in that flexibility of each time we get a report. Initially, when the school board started with strategic governance, we approved all of the measures before staff reported. And in the transition between changing the measures and wanting to keep moving forward with our other work, the decision was made this time to get the report with the data and then look at the measures and make sure they were okay. So that's a little bit different in the process and how that's built in. But the other piece you're referencing, I think probably a forum would be the best place, is my advice.
Yeah, if you're talking about significant change in how we school board governs the school system's operations, then certainly they will require a lot of discussion by board members. So it should go through a forum and potentially retreat and other way to discuss. Yeah.
So any other suggestions? Ms. Strauss?
Just a very broad one, and I think it's been touched on before. Again, where we have so much data available, and it is data that the school system uses, it's important for their work to evaluate your business processes. There's data that we produce for the federal government, for the state, what have you, and I guess then it is. And the public always wants to be able to have easy access to it, which, as they should. Anything that we report needs to be out there. And then the question is, how much do we actually have to see? How much of it then becomes easily accessible to the community if they want it? And when we went down the whole, when we made the decision to go to this kind of governance process, we had a community that was hungry for everything, and we want to turn ourselves inside out. So I think it's a balance between what do we actually want to talk about and review ourselves, what just simply needs to be available for those people. Technology is so much more robust, so I think that's part of the balancing act. But we would never want to be in a position to not make to the public available whatever it is that we have to have. We just don't need to spend a lot of time talking about it all the time.
Yeah, that's the trick. I'm going to give you a different viewpoint, too, about the number of computers for technicians, because on the other hand, when we advocate for positions and budget and things, it's important to know our efficiencies. So I have three things that we decided to do. We've asked staff to configure the appendix differently. My suggestion was to remove 1.5 and then asking staff to review which measures that they would think that we should cut out of this report. That will come back to governance. Seeing no other hands, this work session is done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll take a lunch break and get back at 1:30. I think that's strategic planning. Let me see how it is. Yeah, strategic planning work session will be shorter than as originally anticipated. So 1:30.